name is Dr. Sally Rocks, and in this brief talk, I will be discussing microplastic pollution in Utah Lake and how population density may impact the lake and this pollution. I'm a chemist and a faculty member at Utah Valley University, and over the past 2 years, I have been working to quantify and understand the sources of microplastics in Utah Lake, including what is in the water, the sediments, and what is deposited from the air. So let's start with what are microplastics? Well, plastics are really useful materials. They're lightweight, they're durable, they're customizable. However, plastic materials have a finite lifetime to the consumer, and global plastic waste exceeds 275 million tons per year. Some of that plastic ends up in landfills, some is recycled, but much of it enters the environment. Over 8 million tons of plastics end up in rivers and surface runoff each year and head towards the oceans. Once in the environment, the plastics can break down into smaller pieces. And the term microplastics refers to these small pieces, specifically to synthetic particles or fibers less than 5 millimeters in diameter. Now, there are two classifications of microplastics, primary and secondary. Primary plastics are those that are manufactured to a specific size and are used in consumer products such as paints as cosmetics. Microbeads, such as those pictured here, and the end of a fingertip, have been banned from cosmetics in the United States since 2018, but have accumulated in the environment. They are now banned in Europe and are slowly being banned around the rest of the world, but are making up a large portion of the microplastics in the environment. Secondary plastics are formed through degradation of larger pieces of plastic. So this would be plastic water bottles and waste along a waste shore, for a lake shore, for example. These secondary plastics will break down in areas with high UV light intensity, such as our sunshine, and due to wind and water and mechanical forces, and they commonly are formed from mismanaged plastic waste or litter. Both forms are present in Utah Lake, and our weather is perfect for generating secondary plastic particles. This is an image of a blue piece of plastic. It's one of many pieces of microplastics that we found from Utah Lake. Now, the issues of microplastics, it's a global one. While much of the microplastics we find in Utah are likely generated here, microplastics are so small that they are highly mobile, especially in the air. Even areas we consider untouched wilderness contain plastics, such as our national parks and the Greenland ice sheet. This means that some of the plastics in our environment traveled on the wind from other cities and states before being captured in the water and the sediments of Utah Lake. So where do the plastics come from in Utah Lake? Well, we found substantial microplastic accumulation in the waters of Utah Lake, which is not surprising as it is similar to what others have found in other freshwater systems, such as the Snake River and the Great Lakes. Most of the microplastics are secondary plastics, and we see a mixture of particles and fiber. This is an example of some of the plastics we commonly see in this image here where you see the red dots. We use a fluorescent red dye to pick out the plastics amongst the many particles in our samples. What we have found is that the levels of microplastics are not evenly distributed throughout the lake. There are sources, or point sources, where we see higher levels of plastics, especially plastic fibers like the one that's called out right here. And then this is a scanning electron microscope image of that piece of plastic and that fiber. And these types of fibers are associated with laundry. When we wash our clothes, the fabric experiences mechanical stress and thousands of fibers are released with every load of laundry. Many of these fibers are synthetic because we wear synthetic fabrics, and they are small enough to be considered microplastics. Now, wastewater treatment plants are generally very good at removing the vast majority of these fibers before the water is released into the environment. But the sheer volumes involved mean that appreciable numbers of microplastics enter the water environment from wastewater effluent. Now, the bulk of laundry fibers are captured in the biosolids, and biosolids can be used as fertilizer for agriculture because they're very rich in nutrients. In Utah Lake, we have seen that some points in the lake have more than 10-fold more fibers than others, and these areas with high fibers are adjacent to agricultural sites. This indicates that laundry and likely biosolid applications in agriculture are a large component of the microplastics present. So that we know that we have all these microplastics in Utah Lake, you're probably wondering, so what? Well, we know that the microplastics are ubiquitous. They're not just present in Utah Lake. They're present all over the globe, even in locations far away from human habitation. And we have tens to hundreds of microplastics present in every liter of Utah Lake water. But should you be concerned for your health? The answer is simply, we don't know yet. But here's what we do know. You consume over 40,000 plastic particles every year. That number actually increases to over 100,000 if you consume water from plastic water bottles. This is basically from what you eat and drink and from the air you breathe. Microplastics can build up and block the digestive pathways of smaller organisms, but that's not been shown yet in humans. And they can accumulate and lead to lung and gut injuries in smaller organisms, mostly due to abrasions. However, plastics that are quite small have been shown to be able to enter the bloodstream and have caused immune responses in some fish studies. And those things could happen in people, however, we have not seen it yet. Plastics can act as carriers, importantly, for other harmful materials. So you may have heard of bisphenol A or BPA. It's an estrogen mimic. It can cause endocrine disruption in humans, and it is a component of many plastics, and it can slowly be carried then into people or animals along with these microplastics. The microplastic particles are also very porous. They have fissures and little holes in them, so they have a very high surface area, and they're more hydrophobic or oily than the water that surrounds them, and so they can concentrate organics on their surfaces like pesticides and act as a vector to carry the pesticides with them wherever they go. They can also accumulate heavy metals. So some people are more worried about what is potentially attached to the plastics themselves opposed to the plastics. If we want to use Utah Lake for recreational activities such as fishing, we do need to consider if the plastic content in the fish could pose an issue to human health. The plastics likely accumulate in the fish digestive tracts, which we don't commonly consume. So more likely to pose an issue are the organics and the heavy metals that could come with the plastics and be delivered to the fish, just from the accumulation of the plastic particles in their systems. These heavy metals and pesticides and other organics can accumulate in muscle tissue and then can be passed on to people that consume that fish. The bottom line is that the science is not complete in this area, and work is ongoing to better probe the impacts of microplastics on people. There is a large amount of science being done to better answer these questions. I think we can safely say microplastics pose no benefit to our community, but we cannot say if they pose an imminent threat. We have to wait for the science to tell us which way that will go. So what does the future hold? Based on our work on Utah Lake water, we can say that microplastics are already here and in appreciable quantities. These plastics may or may not be directly harmful to human health, we don't know, but they do pose a threat to aquatic life, and they will impact the ecology of the lake by building up in smaller organisms and possibly damaging them. As our population grows, so will the plastic inputs to our environment. Also, if we choose to dredge the lake, we can remobilize the plastic particles captured in the sediments and allow these to interact with the water and life in the lake. This has been studied in dredging operations in China, where dredging has been shown to remobilize plastic particles, and this can further increase the plastic load of the lake water and our exposure to these plastics and whatever may be on their surfaces. There are a few ways that we can decrease microplastics entering the environment. Reduction of mismanaged waste, that's litter, that can degrade into microplastics will have a positive impact, of course. This includes recycling efforts and reducing the amount of single-use plastics, especially in the form of packaging. Also, we can invest in wastewater treatment technologies to better remove small particles. Rapid sand filters can remove approximately 97% of these particles. More expensive technologies such as membrane bioreactors have been shown to remove over 99% of microplastics. Importantly, we have to think carefully about what we do with the biosolids from wastewater treatment. These solids hold all of those particles that were removed. Application of these nutrient-rich solids as fertilizer is often seen as a win-win, as farms can take advantage of readily available local fertilizer at little to no cost and reduce landfill volumes at the same time. Unfortunately, this also can mobilize all those plastic fibers that were captured in wastewater treatment. It is a question of trade-offs. Is it better to reduce landfill volume or microplastic mobility? Like many environmental questions, there are no easy answers, but we do need to be aware of the questions so that we can find these answers. So thank you for your time. Please feel free to contact me, Sally Rocks, if you have any questions or wish to discuss microplastics. And I hope you learned something interesting about microplastics along the way.